What is going on, guys? We are back playing some more Surviving with Create 0.3, and today we are going to be setting up a modular utility contraption, which I know probably sounds like total gibberish to a bunch of you, but I promise it's an extremely cool and useful build, and it's also really cheap and really easy to set up. So a general overview of what this is going to do and how it's going to function for those of you that probably don't have any idea what I'm talking about. You're basically going to have one room that's visible and usable in your base, and then you're going to have a bunch of other rooms that are the same exact size that are hidden behind a wall somewhere, and through the use of a contraption, some redstone, some buttons, you're going to select what room you want, and that room is then going to switch places with the room that's currently visible in your base, so that you can then use whatever's in that other room that you wanted, and the room that was previously there will then be hidden behind the wall again. So it's basically going to be like a scene out of Scooby-Doo where they have like a bookshelf somewhere and they pull a book off of it and all of a sudden part of the wall rotates and they're hidden behind it. No one knows where they are, except in this case, we're not going to get stuck behind the wall. And we also actually want it to happen. It's not by accident. So a little bit different, but the idea is still sort of the same. So I believe the first place I ever saw this idea used was in ZAF's first episode of their Create series, and they came up with a really cool rudimentary design with this same idea, but today we're going to be coming up with our own version of it, making some slight improvements to it, and there is going to be one huge difference between the setup we do today and pretty much every other version of this setup I've seen up until this point. And that is the number of buttons and the ability to select what room you want. So with most of these setups, regardless of how many rooms they are rotating between, they have one single button that you push and it rotates to the next room in line. But that's obviously a problem if you don't want the next room. And let's say like today, we're going to have 4 rooms. What if we want the room that we just went past? And then we're going to have to hit the button 3 different times to get that room back to where we want it. So instead, we are going to have a button for each room, and regardless of which room is currently visible in the base, we'll be able to hit the button and get the room that we want out with one push of the button. And obviously that's important because we don't want to have to push a button multiple times because that takes extra time, and time is money and money is diamonds, and everybody needs more diamonds. So we're going to be expert modded Minecraft players and expert redstone users, whatever you'd like to call us, and we will figure out a way to get around that. So now we should probably jump into the requirements for today's episode. So I was not lying when I said that this is going to be an extremely cheap setup to do. As you can see right here, the chest is basically empty. There's barely anything in here, and these are all the requirements we need for both the mechanical portion and the redstone portion of this entire setup. There's even some miscellaneous things in here that don't actually fit into those categories that we're just going to be using to make our lives a little bit easier. So to quickly run through everything we need for this, we are going to need 1 mechanical bearing, 4 radial chassis, 4 buttons, 2 signs, 16 redstone links, 3 sequence gear shifts, 6 encased chain drives, 1 vertical gearbox, a water wheel, a bucket of water, and then a slime ball for the radial chassis, a little bit of super glue, and then whatever things you plan on using as the main focus for each of the different rooms you're setting up. And there's going to be 4 of them. So for today, we're going to have an enchanting setup, a brewing setup, a little bit of storage, and maybe a smelting area. So we're going to be using these for setting different frequencies just so we know what room we're referring to. And then eventually we'll slap these down in the center of those rooms so that we can actually use them. So we can quickly grab out all this stuff from this chest. And then I do have 1 chest next to this, and this chest is going to be, I would say, sort of secondary requirements for the episode. And that is because everything we pulled out just now was for the mechanical requirements of the setup. But obviously there are going to be additional blocks, simply building blocks you need to make the floor and the walls and set up the rooms so that they look nice. And that's what I have stuff right here for. So we've got some brass casing, some planks, some polished andesite, and a couple miscellaneous things to add in to those rooms to make them look nicer. But that's totally up to you what you want to use to decorate and make it look nice. So we will be using some additional blocks to actually construct the platforms and the walls and everything. But I'm not going to include those in the specific requirements for the episode just because they're extremely cheap and they're going to vary extremely heavily depending on how you choose to set this up. So we're not going to grab these just yet. We'll leave them over here until we're actually ready to use them. But the first thing we need to do is actually come over here and discuss quickly the area that you need to clear out so that you can actually start building this. So we're going to be making a perfect circle. And obviously a perfect circle in Minecraft doesn't really exist, but we're going to get as close as we can. So right here, I am using a circle that has been cleared out that has a diameter of 15. I think that's a pretty healthy middle ground between having rooms that are an acceptable size to actually be useful, but also not too big that they're going to be having huge moving areas of your base that you want to avoid standing on. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck behind a wall. So you can go a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. That's totally fine. But I would say a diameter of roughly 15 is good. So you're going to want to clear out a nice circle with that area. And that's where we're going to be building our setup in. So once we have that area cleared out, we're going to want to start out by coming down into the very center, and we're going to want to set up a vertical gearbox and put down our mechanical bearing right on top of that. So right in the center, we're going to put down the gearbox, and then we're going to put down the bearing right on top of that. And that leaves us in a position where if we were to put down the radial chassis on top of this, and we can do that right now, it is going to be right at floor level. So this radial chassis right here, we can go ahead and make this sticky on all sides right now. This is what's going to hold on to the entire platform that will be rotating for the floor at least of the contraption. Now this part is up to you if you want to do this or not after, but you will need to have the floor rotating. It's up to you though if you would like to have the walls also rotating with it. So the difference will basically be, you can imagine if we come up here, if you have the walls actually rotating, it will look like full rooms swapping in and out in this position right here. If you don't, you will actually have static walls and the blocks will just slide right through those when they're a contraption and then they'll get placed down. I personally think it looks better if you have the walls also rotating, but again, it's totally up to you guys. It's a design choice that you can make yourself, but we're just gonna come on up here and we can slap down the additional radial chassis, and then we can make all of those sticky too. And the number of these will vary obviously depending on how tall you want the walls to be, but regardless, you're just gonna stack them all the way up until you're at the ceiling where you want it to stop. Now that we have these, we can start coming over to the beginning, I guess, of the redstone that'll go into assembling this. So we're going to be using encased chain drives today to get all the sequence gear shift inputs. This was recommended to me last episode because we're doing something very similar to the elevator. And we did use belts with shafts in that episode, and it was pointed out to me that I was using a little bit of the extra stress capacity that I might otherwise be able to save because the belts do use 1 stress capacity per RPM, and I was running it, or at least attempting to run it initially at 48, and that was actually wasting a fair bit of stress capacity. So in this case today, we're not going to be cranking up the speed on this. I think it looks better at a moderate to slow speed, so it's not really a concern, but I'm doing this just in case it bothers people last episode. So the chain drives do not actually have any stress capacity usage. So that's definitely something that's nice if you are concerned about using a little bit too much, if you do choose to crank up the speed on this bad boy. So the next thing we're going to do is put down the 3 encased chain drives that will then eventually input into the vertical gearbox. And off of these, we want to put down our 3 sequenced gear shifts. And this is basically going to work just like what we did last episode, where we are going to use these to turn this mechanical bearing a specific amount. So the first one, we want it to be turn 90 degrees, and we can leave it at the input speed going forward. Doesn't matter, we don't need to double it or turn it reverse or anything. The next one, we're going to want to go up to 180, and the next one up to 270. So in this case, it's basically going to be this one rotates us to the next room, this one rotates us to the second room from where we are, and this one rotates us to the third room, which would technically be the one that is to the other side of the room that's currently out, but obviously rotating in the other direction. So this will give us access with these 3 sequence gear shifts to all 3 potentially hidden rooms. And so we're going to be using redstone links that will input relative to the current position of whatever room is out here to get us the room that we want. And that might sound a little bit confusing, but we'll be going over that shortly. The next thing we want to do though for the time being is put 3 encased chain drives on the other side of the sequence gear shifts. And then finally, we're just going to quickly put down a water wheel right off of here, and we can clear out an area right down here. And I should probably grab, I guess, at least a couple things of polished andesite so that we don't have water spilling everywhere when we're down here. But we can just put this down right like this. And, oh, that's not where we wanted to put that. So I think that should be good. And then we can just put our water down. And this should be getting us the max speed. Not that we really need it. This is just going to be going at 16 RPM. And so it's not going to use up nearly all that stress capacity that we have here, but it's a very cheap and easy way to do it. And it doesn't matter how it looks because this is all going to be hidden under the floor. We're never going to see this unless we have to do a little bit of maintenance work in here. But now that we have this set up, I'm actually going to assemble the floor very quickly here so that we can start putting stuff down and figure out which room is where when we come to set our redstone signals. Okay, so the floor has now been assembled, and I know it might look a little bit weird, but I actually like having the brass casing outline that might seem slightly out of place just to indicate where each room is starting and stopping. So right here, we will have what I think is a pretty cool outline in this corner of where the room is going to rotate. But the next thing we want to do is assemble the walls, which are obviously very simple. I'm just going to have them as plain polished andesite. But before we do that, we quickly can come over here and I can show you guys why it is so useful to use radial chassis and to also use a perfect circle. So a lot of people don't realize that with radial chassis, when you go out omnidirectionally, it is going to be a perfect circle. And so that is what we just assembled. I think a lot of people don't realize that because they just don't go out like that and they just end up using it like what we did with the polished andesite, where they might go out in one direction, maybe two, but they don't actually see the full effect. So if we hold control, we want to scroll down to 7 so that we can adjust even the radial chassis that's down here we don't have access to. But if we actually hold it down again and quickly look, you can see that it perfectly highlights this exact area we just set up. So again, a perfect circle. And if you're having trouble actually mapping out a perfect circle for whatever diameter you want, obviously you can look those up online, but you can also use these if you want to know if you're setting it up correctly. So now that we have that and we can verify that we did in fact make the perfect circle, we can begin setting up these walls. And I'm just going to quickly run through that so that we're good to go. And then we can hop back and set up the redstone. So now all the walls are set up. Obviously that makes it a little bit more difficult to do the work when it comes to setting up the rooms because we're gonna have to bust our way through for each of these now, but that's totally fine. It's really important that we get the redstone set up first just to make sure that that's working, because really that's going to be the next most difficult part, and then we can make these adjustments later to make it look nice. So we're going to be setting up our buttons right over on this wall right here, and I'm just going to mine all the way back to get behind these, and we'll do it right here. So we're going to be setting up 4 different buttons, and we're going to do 2 on each side, so just like that and like that. Obviously, we have to make it perfectly symmetrical, and then we are going to use signs, and we need to decide what the buttons will be. So let's say that the one, how do we want to do this? So let's do enchanting, and we'll do the arrow for enchanting down here. So that one will be enchanting, and then we want to do brewing over there. And how many lines do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. So we'll push this button for enchanting, this one for brewing, and then we'll do storage down here for this one. And this one will be smelting, which I know obviously these are not, what you guys need to use for the rooms that you're going to be putting in here, but we wanted that we hit this for enchanting, that for brewing. And now we need to come back and set up the beginning of our redstone links. So one is going to go behind each button, and now we need to set the different frequencies for these. So we're going to want to grab out all the different base items, being the chest, the furnace, the brewing stand, and the enchanting table, and line these up. So this one is enchanting, the other one is brewing. So we'll do frequency 1 here, frequency 1 here, and then down here, this one is storage, frequency 1, and this one is smelting. So now that we have that, we can just cover this back up, and we can begin setting up the redstone that goes below this to make everything move relative to each other. So I'm actually going to line these things up in my inventory and keep this order. So let's do, it's not really important, but it's going to be related to how we set things up here. So let's just say enchanting, then brewing, then a furnace, and then a chest. So let's assume that this one right here is enchanting. So we're going to come down here and we are going to grab out our redstone links and we're going to grab out some super glue and we're going to say, okay, we now need to attach these redstone links right above these sequence gear shifts. So it's going to end up being this block, and this block. We'll put down our redstone links on each of these, and we need to make sure that they're actually glued on. We obviously don't have a radial chassis to hold these on, but now that these are here, we need to say, okay, if enchanting is our first one, and they are going to then rotate, if they rotate 90 degrees, they will get to the brewing setup. So we're going to want to set this to be frequency 1 for brewing. Then we're going to want to set this one to be frequency 1 for our storage, or for our smelting, and then this one over here to be frequency 1 for storage. Then we just need to come in and set these all to be receiving, just like that. And so now these should all be done relative to its current position. So this might look very similar to the elevator setup with the call buttons, because what will happen is once this rotates to the next setup, we're going to look at exactly where this is positioned. So it's going to be 2 out from this. And so then when we come over here, let's think, okay, if this were to rotate, it would technically be this one right here, here, and here. So then we can set this one up right here. If I'm counting it properly, once these are placed down, we're going to want to set each of them to receiving again. And now we need to come through and set the appropriate frequencies for these again, so that when it rotates, it is relative to its current position. So we are now going to be on the brewing stand portion of the setup. We're on the second room, which means that a 90-degree rotation would want to put this one at the smelting setup. So this is going to be frequency 1. This one's going to be frequency 1 for this one. So we'll have the storage. And then the last frequency, which would be the room we just came from before this, will be the enchanting setup. And we're now going to do this just again over here. So come out right here with these, put these links down, set them to receiving yet again, and this time we're going to go based off of the smelting setup being this one. So frequency 1 is going to be storage for this one, and then we're going to do enchanting for this one and the brewing for this one. And then we're going to do it one last time right over here. So come out 1, use that on these, put down our links, make them all receiving, and then finally this one's going to be the storage. So the enchanting is going to be frequency 1, brewing is going to be frequency 1 for that, and smelting is going to be frequency 1 for that. So now we can go verify if we were to hit the buttons that it rotates to the appropriate room. But one thing is we just need to make sure that it's rotating in the proper direction. If it's not, all we're going to do is simply come down here and flip all these sequence to reverse. So very easy to check. We want it to rotate so that it's going to the right. So if we were to push the enchanting, this is the first one, but brewing should be the second one. So there we go. So it is in fact rotating in the correct direction. If we were to push enchanting now, it should rotate all the way around. And there we go. So you can see one push of a button is able to make it rotate so that we get all the way to the room we just came from instead of having to push the button 3 times. And we can test out all of these just to make sure that they each work. So there we go. So now we can just put down all the different blocks that we planned on using on these different parts. I'm not going to make it look really fancy right now, but if you wanted to do, let's say enchanting for an example, we can come in, we can grab out our bookshelves, and we can just come over, and we do need to make sure that these are all appropriately stuck. So my best guess would be to just use super glue, since you're not always going to have them in contact with a working radial chassis when you set these up. So I would just use super glue. I know you guys let me know that you can in fact put it in your offhand and everything gets glued together. So we're going to want to glue down our enchanting table, and then we're going to want to glue down all of our bookshelves. And I believe we are going to need, I think we might need one more for this. Do we have anything we can enchant? We can enchant super glue. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, we'll do one more just because I think it looks nice. So there it is. That's our enchanting setup. Now we can add more designs to the rest of this, more books if we want to make it look appropriate. But this should have a level 30 enchanting setup. And so now if we were to hit a button, let's say to go to brewing, that will all rotate behind there. And if we wanted that back, then we just hit a button, say that we want to do some enchanting, and boom, we have our enchanting setup back out here. So I think that's definitely really cool. Now, if we were to do brewing, I'm just going to quickly set down some blocks on each of these in the center just so that we have a point of reference. So we have that, and then we have storage, would simply be a chest right in here. And then finally, smelting would just be a furnace right here. Now, obviously, this is not fancy. I'll make it look nice off camera, but right now I would need some time to come up with ideas to how to make this actually look very nice down here. But I wanted to get the technical details down for you guys as quickly as I could, just because I think this is a very cool idea. And obviously, it doesn't matter how I design it. You guys will design it differently, and you'll probably have different rooms than I do. Obviously, we're a little bit limited when it comes to create, just because there's not a ton of different things that you can include outside of vanilla stuff on these rooms. But if you're playing in a mod pack, there's a ton of different stuff that you could do with this. And obviously the sky is the limit. So I'd be curious to know in the comments, if you're setting this up, what different rooms do you plan on using? Or if you think you would set one of these up in the future, what rooms would you think to use then? Just because I definitely find it interesting to know all people's, ideas for what they would use and have hidden behind the wall somewhere, because these tend to be setups that you use semi-frequently, but not enough to warrant having an entire area in your base designed for that and have them taking up a bunch of room. But if we want to get the full effect, all we got to do is come over and grab out, I think, just some regular oak planks, and we can fill in this area right here, get rid of the andesite. And now it looks, well, we need a little bit of lighting over here, but I'll put appropriate lighting on each one of these. Maybe we'll get some glowstone in the walls, but yeah, I am super happy with how this turned out. I definitely think it is an awesome idea. So hopefully you guys get some use out of this, come up with some cool ideas. That is going to be it for today, guys. I just quickly want to say I appreciate you guys bearing with me when it comes to the frequency of videos over the last 2 weeks or so. For those of you that saw the post, you would know that I actually just went on vacation, my first vacation in over a year. And I did that because I just left my old job because I got a better offer at a new position doing pretty much the same thing that I do working on medical devices as a chemical engineer. But so I took the new offer, took a week off in between jobs. And so I finally got a little bit of a break, but that made it so, with taking the vacation, not being able to record. And then also this was my first week. Yesterday was actually my first day at my new job. I haven't been able to record as much. So I appreciate you guys bearing with me. But I promise we'll be back to, 2 uploads a week frequency very shortly. But again, just wanted to give you guys a heads up and say thank you. And yeah, I will talk to you guys later.